Right, so we should say we're recording the session. So if you want to have your camera switched off during it, that's absolutely fine. If you're happy for your face to be on screen, also okay. The Maritime UK Careers and Outreach Programme has been running for a couple of years. David Philipson, who's in the meeting with us, is someone that I met a year ago, 18 months ago, possibly, when we first started talking about the work that his organisation is doing around tidal stream power harvesting. And it's really important that careers professionals, careers leaders know not just about jobs that are happening now, but know about what an incoming industries. And that I would say that this session falls into that category, really. It's tremendously good news, the opportunities that are going to come with this sort of work. And we're just helping you to get a little bit ahead of the game and recognise this, so when you're having conversations with your clients that you're well versed. You may or may not have been in one of our CPD sessions before. I'm just going to whiz through a couple of slides just describing the careers programme. And there's some useful links and so on in there that you'll be able to peruse at your leisure. So the Maritime 2050 strategy, let's start with that. The Department for Transport has set out a vision where they are saying that the maritime sector will double in size in the next 10 years. I'm hearing a bit of echo. I don't know about you, Jess.
Yeah, something strange is happening. Hang on 2 seconds. Let me stop sharing for a minute. Technology is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah. If everyone else that's in the meeting can mute, sometimes that that can have an impact.
I think that's a little bit better, isn't it?
Yeah, you've stopped sharing the presentation. Do you want to pop it back on?
It might be because Jess was unmuted, so we might have had echo from Jess, I think.
There you are. She's on mute now. So the 2050 strategy sets out long-term aims for the maritime sector and expectations. And one of the things that they were looking for is a coordinated and collaborative careers programme. Clean maritime and maritime net zero by 2050 as a target is something that there is huge amounts of activity going on. New jobs, newly created opportunities, and the most incredible clean maritime vessels, strategies in ports and so on and so forth. But as a sector, we've really grabbed onto that one. I would just start off by saying that, can you ping, sorry, those are all the different industries that make up the maritime sector. It's way broader than you can imagine. There's about 1.1 million people in the UK work in the maritime sector, and we expect that to double. 75% of the jobs are actually on shore. And when you talk to young people about a job in maritime, they're going to think that means working on a ship. And it's not necessarily working on a ship, it's all those other industries. Okay, can we skip forward, please, Jess? So the careers programme has a number of pillars within it. We have a careers professionals network, and that's a way of you keeping up to date with us as there's new resources or new opportunities, events that come along, newsletters and so on and so forth. We run CPD sessions like this one. What's really important is that we record them and then we retain them on the website. So again, you can access them at a time that suits you around your working responsibilities. We have nearly 200 industry ambassadors across the UK, and between them, through the Inspiring the Future programme, they've spoken about maritime careers to over 55,000 children in a couple of years. So that is, if you're not already signed up for Inspiring the Future, I would encourage you to do so. We do outreach work. We link with schools and colleges to support them by linking them with ambassadors primarily on site. The team at Maritime UK is very small. We can't cover all the careers fairs. There's a huge number of resources online, videos, interviews, people talking about their career and how they got to the place that they are at now, virtual tours of maritime vessels and sites. We have lesson plans. I've got a nice little activity that helps explore international logistics and shipping by talking about the cargo ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal in 2021. We've done lots of work with educators. So in Careers Week class this year, actually it seems longer ago than that, but in National Careers Week this year, we ran a careers session for FE leaders in London. And really that was to challenge their understanding of the opportunities in London for young people to move into a career in maritime. 40,000 jobs just in London in the maritime sector. And what I wanted them to do was to go away going, I had no idea, I need to look at my careers programme. We're doing a very similar event in the Solent, actually, in the spring next year. And other regional clusters in Maritime UK are likely to pick that up as well. We've also done work with the Royal Museums, and we've invited children in on open days. A huge number of open events, actually, around the country in Maritime UK Week in October. We are involved in the development of maritime qualifications, and we're working with the Department for Education and with education providers on that. And Maritime Masters is a way of linking master's students who are doing maritime qualifications with business. And in fact, we invite business to come up with research topics that they can use as their final project. And then finally, we've run a series of Ask Us Anything live chats when Jess, it used to be me, but Jess will be available online if people have got questions about maritime. Next slide, please. And this is just really looking at some of the resources, but maritime is changing. So we talk now about robotics, about artificial intelligence, about autonomous vessels, about digitalisation, clean maritime, decarbonisation and wind and wave power harvesting, as well as all the other stuff. I was at a conference last week where they were showing underwater craft surveying robots, basically, that go down to the seabed and are surveying the robustness of cable lines in the bottom of the sea. And if you think about all that's been in the news recently about cable lines suddenly becoming damaged in the North Sea and so on, you can see that's very timely. The beauty of what they were talking about was that these little submarines, really, for want of a better word, because they're autonomous, because there's no people in them, they're charged up by electricity before they go off. They can actually go deeper in the water and stay down for longer because you haven't got the human risk in there, which obviously you're limited with small submarines as to how long people can be underwater. But this is just one of the pages from the careers websites, but you can go into each one of these different industries and explore and look at the resources that we have to help your clients understand the sector better. Next one, please, Jess. So I've talked about this a little bit. So there's the main careers area, there's information activities, which are longer videos that look at one particular industry. So it might be careers at sea, it might be about how to get a job in marine science or in conservation. It might be specifically looking at greener yachting, for example, but there's all sorts of different longer videos that are there. The virtual tours are terrific. So the little 5 questions in 5 minutes careers give you an insight. And in terms of diversity, there's a fantastic selection of people from different ethnic backgrounds, different ages, different levels of entry qualification, male, female, they're all there. So if you're looking for some interesting people to share with your whether they're school or college clients, it's all there. And then our industry ambassadors, and I can't quite see it, but I don't know if it's because it's not I don't know if you can see it as well. At the very bottom, it says Instagram and TikTok. Maritime UK Careers started Instagram and TikTok platforms in time for National Careers Week, and the impact has been huge. So we'll get Jess to share the links in the chat if you're able, and you can have a look at those and perhaps share those with young people. I think that might be the last one, is it, Jess, for me? Yes. So there's Jess's email address. Oh, there you go. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all there for you to share. I would just finally say that we've built the resources over a couple of years. They are freely available to you. You don't have to ask our permission to download them and use them within your careers programme. But if you could credit us in them on social media to say that you've used them, that would be extremely useful. And that's my whistle stop kind of set context, Jess. Okay.
Thank you very much, Lorna. I think we're going to hand over to David now. So hopefully technology will be a bit kinder to us when we pull up his slides.
Well, just while we're waiting for that, Jess, I'll just do a quick introduction, if that's all right. Good afternoon, all. David Philipson. I work for the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, which is essentially a department division of, funded by at least Innovate UK, part of BEIS. And my role, I'm project manager leading a 4-year project to develop tidal stream energy opportunities on both sides of the Channel Manche. So European funded, it's a pre-Brexit legacy. It has a hard stop date of the middle of next year, and we're making all sorts of really interesting progress, which hopefully I'll get to touch on in a minute. But particularly what I was asked to talk to you all about today was just to raise awareness of the future opportunities of the nascent industry that we're developing, and ask you to ensure that the young people that you have contact with are aware of such opportunities and might consider supporting the development of the tidal stream sector as a career choice going forward. So if we could move on to the next one, Jess, that'd be great. Thank you. Just a quick outline of what I thought we would cover today. Happy to take all sorts of questions at the end. Can't promise I can answer any of them, but we can certainly take the questions. An introduction to tidal stream energy. What is it? What are we talking about? How is it different from other forms of offshore renewable energy? What might the devices and turbines look like? And indeed, what opportunity is there for the UK and the global marketplace, with particular relevance to what might that mean for local employment opportunity? And I think the answers to all of those questions are really very, very positive, amplified in the current environment with the war in Ukraine and desire to wean our reliance off fossil fuels and gas to carbon net zero. So we'll come on to that, I'm sure. So interesting, lots of interesting content to talk about. I hope it engages you today. So if I could have the next slide, Jess, that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks. So back to first principles, really. Tidal energy is essentially converting the gravitational force that the moon exerts on the water around the planet. Simple as that. As we all know, the moon pulls the water, the world rotates, the water gets pulled, that creates currents in the oceans around the world, and those currents can be quite significant. They can be, what we are dealing with in our tidal stream energy project is currents of between 3.5 to 5 meters a second. That's broadly 12 to 18 kilometers an hour. And generally speaking, offshore wind turbines have a cut-in wind speed of about 10 to 12 kilometers an hour. So quite comparable in terms of the speeds we're talking about. Obviously, the speed of the tide changes as the tide turns, so it's not always flowing at 5 meters a second or 18 kilometers an hour, but certainly significant flows that house significant amounts of energy. And those currents or tidal flows in the oceans are and can be amplified by local geographic conditions. And I think a classic example of that is the Severn Bore, where the funnel shape of the tide rushing into the Severn creates essentially a standing wave that guys can surf. And what's really interesting, when you expand that up, the channel is not dissimilar in that it is quite an hourglass shape. So it has the funnel coming in the Bay of Biscay in the southern Atlantic, and it has on the northern side a funneling down through Essex around the Kent coast from the North Sea. So we are blessed in that the flows, as the tide comes in, gets funneled, and as the tide goes out, it gets funneled. And hopefully we'll touch on that in a minute. So perhaps the next slide, Jess, we can move on. Thanks. So those fast-moving flows in the water column are then not dissimilar to a wind turbine. They are captured by a turbine which we place on the seabed. Well, actually, there's three different methods currently. We can have it floating, we can have a device tethered so it flies mid-column, or it's actually anchored to the seabed as per the graphic there. But they all do the same thing. They convert the fast-flowing weight of the water collides with the blades to rotate a generator inside the nacelle, and that nacelle generates the electricity, the rotor inside the electrical windings, and the electricity generator is exported to shore through a subsea cable. Again, completely analogous with offshore wind. What is interesting, when one compares the tidal opportunity to offshore wind opportunity, we're probably about 20 years behind. Offshore wind technologies were developed in the UK, and as the global uptake of offshore wind developed, a lot of those jobs went offshore. And we would like to avoid that with the tidal stream opportunity. We would like to, as happened with the generation of the offshore sector, lots of those jobs are now in Vestas and Denmark and Sweden and other places. We'd like to keep those jobs onshore if indeed possible. One final point I'll make, and a bit more of a technical geeky sort of statement, but water is 832 times more dense than air. So it doesn't have to be flowing anywhere near as fast as offshore wind to generate the same level of electricity. Obviously, the tidal device, the size of the tidal device is constrained by the depth of the water that it's in. And invariably what we're operating at is somewhere in the region of 85 to 90 meters deep, which was interesting. Lorna, you were talking about remote operated vehicles earlier and those subsea cable inspections, because a lot of our installations are beyond the limits of commercial divers. So it's not safe, essentially, for people to be down there for too long. It's too deep. And generally, the device we're looking at here, those blades are about 24 meters across. So this thing probably stands 40 meters off the seabed. And then you have, 30-meter clearance head height for commercial shipping above, and you're in 70 to 80 meters worth of depth of water. And that's the one thing that really blew my mind when I entered the sector. This thing's as big as my house. I live in a 4-bed semi in London. This thing's bigger than my house. It's huge. It's huge. I think I've covered everything on that slide. So if we could move to the next one, that would be great. Oh, it's the video. Let's see if this works. I get to shut up for a bit. Jess, I don't think we need to play the whole video. I think is it stopped? Good. I thought it was. I thought we was going to play the whole thing. We'd be here for hours. Okay, so I hope that explained or covered a bit of what I touched on earlier a bit more eloquently than I did. But I think it's interesting to just first of all to start at the global perspective. Obviously, as it said in the video, where tidal flows are strongest is where the opportunity is greatest. Don't think it takes a brain of Britain to work that out. This is essentially a heat map of the tidal range, so the way tidal goes up and down around the world, and the flows obviously are closely aligned to that. The darker the colour, the higher the flow. You can see the UK, Bay of Biscay, Channel Manche region, which is my project, is the darkest colour on the map. And over in northern Canada, if you have a look, up there on the Bay of Fundy, highest tides in the world, greatest global opportunity, #1 global resource in the world. But the issue with the Bay of Fundy is it's miles from anywhere. And to generate the cable and export it to anywhere useful, you have, first of all, distribution losses, but the cable is essentially £1 million a kilometre. So, you know, if you're 500 kilometres from anywhere useful, the whole thing just becomes uneconomic. Whereas the UK is in this fortuitous position with the intense global tidal resource it has on its doorstep through the channel. There's either side of the channel, you know, there are large urban conurbations not too far from where the electricity will be generated and therefore used. So there are less losses and it's less expensive to actually get that electricity back to shore. So I thought I'd just put this in as a global opportunity, as a picture, as a snapshot of the global picture, because as I said, tidal energy is 20 years or so behind offshore wind. There is an industry in its nascent stages. There is a huge global export opportunity for the UK if we get this technology right. And that is part of the thrust of the discussion for today. So the question of where you want to work, you can work in your local community if you live in a local community, or you can go and work in the Bahamas if you fancy it, because they might need it too. So I would imagine that those sorts of global opportunities would be of intense interest to some, not all, of the young adults that you no doubt are talking to. So that's sort of a global snapshot, a global high-level view. Let's move on to the next one, which gives us a bit more of a, I think we start to get a bit more local. That's right. Now, I put this in because I was talking about 5 meters a second and water flowing at 8 kilometers an hour. What does that look like? This is the tide coming in at La Raz-Blanchard on the southern side of the channel. Look at that flow. It just blows my mind. Look at that flow of the water. Let's just, I'd hate to be sailing in it, but the energy that you can see is just simply driven by the tide coming in. All of that turbulence, all of those whitecaps is a manifestation of the energy that the inrushing water contains. So let's just, I think the next one brings us a bit closer to home. If I've done this right, it's gone, oh no. So we spoke about the global opportunity. Clearly, tidal flows are driven by the moon. So not an ounce of carbon in sight. A naturally occurring sustainable resource, which has the capacity to generate 11% of the entire UK electrical consumption. That's over 3 million homes just from the waters around our coast. The beauty of being an island nation is that we have it on all sides, as opposed to France. They've just got the English Channel bit. The other point I make here is predictable. Yeah, we know when the moon's coming around. We can predict when the tides are going to be for the next 6 months, 6 years, 60 years. And that predictability has a value in the base load that the national grid needs to provide to ensure that we all have a cup of tea when Coronation Street, we all jump up halfway in Coronation Street, make a cup of tea and the kettle goes on, bang. Now, the tide obviously changes throughout the day, throughout the year, throughout the month, so it's not always at the time people want to make their cup of tea, but it is a consistent, reliable provision, or has the opportunity to be a reliable, predictable provider of electrical generation to meet forecast demand. And we did some work with Imperial College up here in London, and they put the value of that predictability is at £400 million per year to the national grid. So there is a significant financial benefit as well as the economic benefit that a carbon-free, sustainable form of energy can realise and provide the nation. So clean, green, renewable, help wean the UK. This is a slide deck I've put together initially. I've amended it since, but initially, way before the Ukraine conflict. These points in here have just been amplified by what's going on in Ukraine and our desire to get off the spike in energy prices that we're seeing in gas. You know, if we'd done this 10 years ago, we wouldn't have such an issue. I'll get off my high horse. Let's go to the next one, please, Jess. So the Tiger Project, how are we realising this opportunity? The Tiger Project is an EU-funded industry development program. It's proving, prototyping, developing the technology to prove it works and then take it to the stage where it's fit for purpose, it's investment ready, it's ready for wider commercial deployment. We have 18 partners across the UK and France. We have 6 academic institutions, all sorts of interesting PhD research studies going on around materials and marine environments, and we'll come on to that when we talk about employment requirements. 18 partners, 48 million euros. It's 4 years with a hard stop in the middle of next year, as I said. Cross-border collaborative program between the UK and France, funded from pre-Brexit days when we were a member of the Interreg EU Development Fund. Its purpose is to drive the generation, as I said, the creation of this nascent tidal stream energy opportunity, which will then deliver significant economic benefit in the future when these technologies mature and are deployed commercially to coastal communities around both nations. Certainly the underlying rationale for the business case for the project that I'm running. Excuse me. The lead there is the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, which I mentioned in the introduction. We're actually based down in Hale, although I live in London. My office is in Hale and Cornwall. And as I say, it's a really interesting project across both France and the UK. What's the next slide? We come on to employment requirements. Oh no, this is the one where I was trying to get local to home. So again, we saw the global opportunity. We saw that image of the rush of tidal flow across the Ras Blanchard, and directly across the channel from the Ras Blanchard image that we saw is the Isle of Wight. Actually, it's probably a bit further along down by Portland Bill, but the flows are not dissimilar on both sides of the channel. And one of our partners is the Perpetuous Tidal Energy Centre, PTEC, on the Isle of Wight. They're bidding into the next allocation round 5 for offshore renewable energy funding. As part of our activity under Tiger, we secured, I don't know how much you know about how offshore renewable energy works, but essentially the government invites bids for certain sites, and people say, oh, I'll do it for this much, and they get essentially a subsidy to help develop their technologies. We were successful under allocation round 4, which happened, I think, earlier in the year, where we secured a £20 million development fund, UK only, for £20 million a year for 15 years, 300 million quid, to develop tidal stream energy in the UK. PTEC is one of those sites bidding in. All of those devices there is the O2 orbital marine power device, which was actually in the video. You saw the two. They are the partner with PTEC to seek to leverage the opportunity that we have in AR5 and to start to realise the commercial applications of some of these technologies. We're getting to the point where the prototypes have been developed, they've been proven, they're being refined, they'll be proven again, they'll be tested, and we are approaching, I think it's fair to say, that the tidal sector generally is approaching the point where it's on the cusp of commercial deployment. And the PTEC site off the Isle of Wight is a good example of where those opportunities might be on the south coast. Enough to say about that. Let's move on. I could rattle on for hours about the opportunities along the south coast. So here we're getting to the nub of today's discussion. A lot of our techno-economic analysis has indicated that as we develop the tidal stream energy technologies and the capability to generate this electricity and send it back to shore, there is the opportunity to generate 22,000 jobs by 2035. Now, this is an industry which doesn't even exist at the moment. We are still developing prototypes. So in the next 10, 12 years, excuse me, this thing is going to ramp up significantly. And as I say, the issues and the situation in Ukraine and the global energy security issues that all of that presents us with only serves to amplify the drive behind developing the sector. What we need is keen, young, bright minds to join the sector and support its development, which is why I'm absolutely delighted to have had the opportunity to talk to you today. I touched on the international career, but I'll probably do that again. But let's go to the next slide, Jess, please. So I've summarised the next couple into one, so we might be able to whiz past the next couple. But so the question is, if there's 22,000 jobs, what are they and where are they? And I've just said, well, we're inventing an industry that doesn't exist yet. You know what they say about you're educating your children for jobs that don't exist? Well, this is a classic case. And it is across the board, everything from CFO of these companies that don't yet exist to deckhands and operatives on the boats that are going to make sure these things continue to work and operate. And so it's difficult for me to provide a specific brief for you all today around what the jobs are and where they are specifically, because it is sector-wide. It is running a business, everything from the HR department, the technical engineering department, the financial department, the legal department, the contracts, the planning, the consent, to the technical development, the engineering that goes into it all. Excuse me. I mentioned that we have a number. We've got 6 academic partners on the Tiger project: University of Plymouth, University of Exeter, University of Manchester, University of Brittany, University of Caen, University of Le Havre. And all of these universities have lots of clever, bright PhD students working on things like materials technology, environmental. I should have had a glass of water when it was time to get a break. But the point I'm making here is it's not just the environmental electrical engineering that one might associate with an electrical device. The blades on some of these things are controlled by an IT system, and they feather, depending on the speed of the water, they will adjust their angle to optimize the yield of the energy that they generate. There's a lot of complex technology in here. It's across the board. It's from the materials, as I say. The marine environment is probably the harshest, most corrosive environment that you could work in. And I can tell you, barnacles get everywhere. You know, they grow in everything. And when you've got something which is spinning, you can't have grit and sand and barnacles getting in it, because then the water gets in. And I ain't a PhD in electrical engineering, but I can tell you that water and electricity don't mix. So when those two, if you have barnacles getting in, and you can't have, 300 megawatt device explode. So lots of really fascinating stuff that's way above mine. So electrical engineers, IT engineers, and that's at the I've sort of started at the PhD level, the research engineering level, both on the engineering side and of course the environmental side. Crucially to say, on the environmental side, what we are about is fixing a problem, not just moving it somewhere else and giving someone else a problem to deal with. We want to solve the problem of net zero. We don't want to create another environmental issue by putting a large mechanical device in the marine environment and just polluting everything. So there is a huge chunk of activity going on in the project around making sure that what we put in is not making another problem. There's some there's some fascinating stuff. The sonar that we've had up in Scotland showing how whales and dolphins know there's a device there and go swim around it. So blow your mind. However, that's so just coming down a bit from that sort of research end of the spectrum. Once it's been researched, and we need designers, we need naval architects, we need people to design the systems and the device itself, and of course then maintain that device, manufacture that device, deploy that device, and maintain it when it's in beneficial use. So across the spectrum, which is probably what I sort of, this side summarised the next couple, so we can probably skip those, as I say. But once it's in the water, it needs to be maintained, because it's not going to create any electricity if it's not spinning. If the barnacles have got in, we need to maintain and keep the device in a fit state to maximise its yield. So the opportunities for employment and this demand for skills are across the spectrum, as I said earlier, from the CEO to the deckhand, everything in between. I think I've banged on about it for enough, have I? Let's just whiz through the next couple, Jess, because I think, as I say, I've sort of summarised that with this one, and I mean, there's more detail in there around the types of jobs, the hydrologists and hydrographic engineers and geotechnical specialists and all sorts of stuff. And it's all in there, and I believe these slides are going to be shared, so you can have a look at that if you like. So that's a bit of a flavour for the sorts of jobs that we will require. And the question is, well, where? And this is, as I said, you know, the beauty of being an island nation. These are marine operating opportunities around the island. So they are local to local communities, local coastal communities. And the point about the ports is a key one, because you can't have a tender vessel go out to maintain a device if it's 200 kilometres away, 100 kilometres away. The closer the better for the response time, the closer the better for the reduced travel time. Reduced travel time equals reduced cost, and so therefore you keep your maintenance costs down. So there will be, I believe, a huge investment coming down the pipeline across the UK at developing and investing in our port facilities. And that will be around the UK. I'm sure that's coming. It has to, because it's key enabling work. Where are you going to put this stuff before you put it in the water? How are you going to get it in the water? There has to be a port facility. So that's the sort of land-based infrastructure that will be required to enable the full-scale realisation of the opportunity of that 11%, 3 million homes. But it's not just coastal, because there's large chunks of carbon fibre, layup, moulds, steelwork, and those sorts of manufacturing jobs, heavy industries, are probably more akin to, I don't know, Birmingham in days past. So there is an opportunity to both distribute the demand across a UK supply chain, and that means the deployment of the marine technologies do have set their feeders and fingers inland into those existing manufacturing facilities, which will create demand, and that's where some of the jobs come from. That last point there about excuse me, marine offshore, I meant offshore, not international offshore. I mean, that's why I put marine in. However, the next point is the point about offshore international, not offshore marine. So if we move to the next slide, Jess, please. A reminder that this is a global opportunity. We in the UK are in the privileged position of being at the vanguard of developing it. We have the second highest, most useful resource, tidal resource, on our doorstep. We have the opportunity to use that as the vehicle to develop an industry, to develop the skills and expertise that we need, and then sell it around the world. And that is the reason why my project, 48 million quid, has been funded. It is the UK investing in future opportunity, creating export opportunity. So the pitch to the young adults that you guys will all be talking to, the world is your oyster, you know, take your piece of it. Which part of it would you like to work in? I would question whether, I had a presentation at a local careers fair at one of my local schools recently. It was absolutely fascinating. The appetite for the net zero, the appetite for the carbon neutral. I started talking and the crowd just got bigger and bigger and bigger. It was amazing. They all have a social conscience and they all have a real interest in understanding how they can play their part. But none of them had any awareness that tidal energy was even out there, was even an opportunity. And it is. It's a huge opportunity. And that's why, as I say, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you all today. What's the next slide, Jess? Let's see if I'm getting through it. So yeah, it's starting to summarize things, which is probably just as well because I'm bantering on a bit. So, you know, carbon-free, net zero, absolutely sustainable, predictable, huge opportunity to meet the UK's, you know, net zero carbon challenge. Wean us off those hydrocarbon demands, take the money out of Putin's pocket. And, you know, I would absolutely invite you all to ask, promote, support the opportunity that Tidal presents to the young adults that you're all talking to. You know, come and join us. Come and join us. It's a great place to be. And I think that was it from me. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but before I took questions, I have a question for everybody else, Jess. Oh, no. Some resources. I've obviously didn't want to go through all of these all today, but again, I assume we'll be sharing the slide deck, and in there's a whole bunch of really interesting offshore renewable energy and tidal specific career related resources. Excuse me. So I'd have a look at that. So yes, my question, before I take questions, I have a question. You saw in the video this device. This is the Orbital Marine Power O2 device. That was the one spinning with the two blades. So I ask you all, put in the chat, A, B or C, whether you think, how long does it take that device to generate the power for your house? How long does it take for that device to power your house for a day? I'll put you all out of your misery. The answer is A. 15 seconds. That means one device, depending on its efficiency, is going to be powering one device is going to be powering somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 homes, which blew my mind. Now, if I take you back to that graphic that I showed you of the Isle of Wight and that little PTEC site and that little array, there's 30 devices proposed. There we go, 30 devices. Well, how many have I put there? 12, I think. I think it's 12, probably growing to 30. The other thing to say about that is look at that little, the area we're talking about, by the way, is that little red bit down the bottom, not the purple hatch bit. So the energy density of tidal is phenomenal, you know, 832 times denser than wind. So you don't need as many of them in as much space. That we did a graphic, and I'm getting a bit off piece there, so just indulge me. But we did a graphic which sort of showed the Isle of Wight. What would it take to power the Isle of Wight with tidal devices? What would it take to power the Isle of Wight with offshore wind? And what would it take to power the Isle of Wight with solar panels? And the solar panel answer was the whole thing sort of covered. So, you know, you don't get to live anywhere. Well, I felt I'll dig that out. I'll see if I can dig that out, Lorna, and share it, Jess, and we can share it with the audience. So yeah, I asked a question and I offered the opportunity to others to ask questions. I don't think there's any more in my deck to cover, is there? I think that's everything. Yeah, there we go. That's me. The sun setting, the moon setting.
Can I ask? I've always got a question, so can I ask you a question? We've obviously got colleagues here from Dorset, from Hampshire, and then from West and East Sussex. Now, when you and I first met, one of the first conversations we had was about the work that was going on in the Celtic Sea and that hook around Devon, Cornwall and so on.
Yep.
And then how this work was in partnership, really, essentially, with the north of France. And it was going to stretch right along the channel and then hook again round that bottom right-hand corner of England. That is brilliant to see that map of the Isle of Wight. Apart from anything else, around the Isle of Wight, we've got double tides. We've got them coming from both sides.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if that means we get 4 a day or 2 a day. I don't know. I'm not a scientist either. But so... in terms, you were saying we're 20 years behind.
Yep. That's
and I know I'm putting you on the spot, so I apologise. But where are we at in terms of actually seeing this technology in the water around the Isle of Wight, off the coast of Dorset or Sussex? I mean, in Sussex, you can see the wind turbines from the coast, can't you? Where are we? What do you think the timeline is, realistically? And I'm sorry for putting you on the spot.
10 years.
But 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I've got, you know, as part of Tiger, we've got all sorts of clever PhD techno and economic analysts looking at this sort of thing and how the cost comes down to enable its sort of wider uptake. And I think what's really interesting, at least for me, at the moment, it's about 250 pounds per megawatt hour for a tidal. The cost of a tidal device to generate electricity is about 250 pounds a megawatt. I think the AR4 that I was referring to, the subsidy that the government provided was 178 pounds a megawatt. So let's call it 200 quid per megawatt hour. Now, offshore wind is 36 quid.
Right.
But when offshore wind started, they were 300 pounds a megawatt. So what we're looking to do, very, you know, and it's plagiarized shamelessly, is follow that trajectory. So in many ways, they have outlined the development course for us, and we are looking to follow that, obviously with a sort of a 10-year lag. But just to put that in context, Sizewell B nuclear power station, £90 a megawatt. So, you know what I was saying before about solving one problem with creating another? We're going to solve the problem, or are we just going to make a whole lot of nuclear waste? Or are we going to solve the problem and solve the problem? And £90 a megawatt hour is the 35-year contract takeoff cost the government have signed up to with EDF and the Chinese. So all that money's going offshore. I'm getting a bit political. You know, we are paying, ironically, EDF's a partner in Tiger, but we are essentially paying the French to develop our nuclear power station to leave us with a nuclear waste problem for the next 10,000 years. And the price that we're paying for that is 3 times what it costs to generate offshore wind. Do the maths. So, you know, my answer to your question is 10 years. That's our current view of the world. What I would hope, and it's been really unfortunate that it would take an event like that in Ukraine to accelerate it, but it does seem that people are starting to wake up and the penny is dropping. My question would be, if it's going to take us 10 years, why didn't we do this 10 years ago and we wouldn't be in this mess?
Yeah. And I'm right, and this is a naive question, but I've got solar panels on my roof, okay?
Yeah, good.
So I know that it's going to take us 6 years to be in profit, if you like.
Yeah, I know.
We're paying for
the
it's saving us about £1,000 a year on our electricity, and it costs us £6,500 to have it put on the roof. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the cost per megawatt hour.
Yeah.
Is there a point where you're saying it will drop from 200 to 35 or whatever, and then it just maintains at 35, or does it become even cheaper to produce in the long run? I suppose it's the maintenance of the equipment, and that's some of the jobs, isn't it? That's some of the opportunities.
It's the ongoing maintenance, which is, you know, the ongoing sort of, and then of course the distribution cost and so that's why you get down to about 36.
Right.
But what's interesting, and you know you touched on it before, Lorna, and we haven't really had this discussion, so we're sort of having it in an open forum. But what's really interesting, right? What are the major carbon? We did a study for. Oh, I'm coming off. Let's get back to my point. What are the major polluters around the world? How much does international logistics, container vessels, bring in all that crap we use and buy and use and consume from China around the planet? How much does that generate? Those diesel fumes that the container ships put out, marine energy. Now we are a reliable offshore marine energy resource. We can, and we are looking at this. We are making offshore hydrogen. Hydrogen. When you burn hydrogen and oxygen burn energy. Water comes out your exhaust pipe, right? So hydrogen is a real energy of the future. What you need for hydrogen is large bodies of water, or the marine environment might be quite useful for that. You split your water into hydrogen and oxygen, and that takes a lot of energy. Well, if there's a lot of energy in the tide at 3 o'clock in the morning and no one's using it because we're all in bed, how about we use it to make hydrogen? Point one, right? And if we're going to use it to make hydrogen, why don't we use it to make hydrogen and store it offshore? And I don't know, one of my sites is Ramsey Sound, just around the corner from Milford Haven. We could have Milford Haven tankers turning up, filling up with hydrogen, and you just convert the entire, I mean, this is sort of future state sort of stuff, right? This is me going off on one. But it is not inconceivable that you could have international shipping running on hydrogen instead of diesel, and that hydrogen could be produced by tidal devices around the planet. Doesn't have to be the UK, although we'd love you to come here and give us your money. Around the planet. And you've just then, what's the percentage that diesel international shipping provides to the global carbon footprint? Bang, gone.
And one of the biggest risks is where you store it on land. So if in fact it's not being stored at the ports or whatever, you reduce that risk. I was in one meeting where people were talking about the production of hydrogen using wind power, and that in the same argument that you've just given, exactly the same argument out in sea somewhere, but then in fact you would kind of have hydrogen fuel stations.
Yeah.
That the boats would come in and that they would recharge and then come and deposit their cargo, reload for the next thing or whatever, turn around and off they go again. And again, that you would essentially have, if you like, fuel stations out at sea. And I just sat there and thought, wow, that's clever, because that had never occurred to me. Anyway, we're almost out of time.
Okay.
So I don't know if we really did let David start. You start to see the workings of his brain, don't you? And I love spending time with David. I find him so fascinating. Yeah. So any really quick questions? What I would say, to my mind, you take nothing else away from this. When you're talking to your young people and they say, I don't know what I want to do, but often, isn't it? I don't want to work in office. I don't want a boring job. But they are interested in the environment or climate change or whatever, that there's this whole industry that is developing, and it's a way of maybe getting them engaged with something that is incoming, which is the purpose. There's a question for you in the chat, actually, from Matthew Cakebread, who's down in the New Forest. He's in Fordingbridge, I think, Matthew, aren't you? And he's saying, do you get out to schools at all? I know you would really like to do that, but there's only one of you, isn't there? So it's tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yes, I have had the opportunity to speak directly, as I said earlier, at a careers fair at my local school, my son's school. It's a charity where there's got two schools, so it's two schools combined. And I really enjoyed that. So I'll be well up for doing more of that. I'm happy to travel across the UK. Our region, as I said, is that sort of southern channel. So everything from Essex round up to the Solent, up to the Severn. Although I do have sites in Wales and I've got sites up in Scotland, so it's not really the Channel region.
So I think that's where the ambassador program ties in really well. We'll be signing you up to that, David, and sending some further information about the ambassador program too, and get you along to some of our larger careers events as well. Because yeah, it was fantastic everything that you had to say, and thank you very much for your time.
My absolute
Matthew's suggesting he'll pick you up from Salisbury train station. There's another question there from Tamsin, and she's in Falmouth.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So maybe if you're down that way, you could have a little.
Yeah, I'm down that way quite frequently. As I say.
Because
in fact, I've probably been to Falmouth more recently than Hale, actually, visiting Fugger offices.
The opportunities for down in the Celtic Sea are just enormous. So Tamsin, we need to make sure that you've got your head around that for your careers program.
And I think where that sort of development is going, you know, you did ask me that, and I sort of started whittling on about other things, but I think, you know, the 10-year lead time, as I say, I think in Tiger we've got at least 3 partners whose technology is good to go, actually, and one of those partners up in Maygen, up in Scotland, there's one company that have generated 50% of the entire tidal energy that's been generated on the planet to date. There's been one company, right? They're good to go. And they're a Tiger partner. Tiger has 8 of the top 10 tidal companies in the world, by the way. There's one out in Japan, and there's one out in Seoul. The rest of them are in Tiger. And I think we're at the point where the technology, at least some of our partners, are more mature than others. The technology is more mature than others. And so, as I say, we are very nearly at the cusp of commercial deployment. And what that needs is, it needs a bit of government subsidy, a bit of government support, because currently it costs 250 quid and you're selling it at 90. So someone's got to make up the difference. And that's what the AA allocation round 5 will do. There was 20 million already assigned in AR4. Some of those devices are in Morlice in Wales, others are in Nova, I believe, up in Scotland. So it's starting. And I think, and I know there's, you know, cost of living crisis, and Rishi will be saying all about can't afford, got bills to pay and loans to pay back, and we're still getting over our COVID stay-at-home furlough scheme, etc., etc. Absolutely right. But I do think it's going to be fascinating to see in the future whether AR5 is actually an increased amount. Because if that's the case, it really shows me that the government's starting to put some money where its mouth is. The Ukraine penny has dropped, and they're getting behind it. And if they do that, then that can accelerate the 10 years.
Yeah.
So brilliant. Thank you very much, David. I'm aware we've gone over our time. Yeah. So if there were any final questions, please do ask them. But thank you for joining us today. And as David said, we'll share all of his information out with you after this session.
Yeah, my contact details are there. So if there's a query that comes up we haven't managed to cover today, then just shoot me a note and I'll ask somebody who knows. Okay.
That's wonderful.
Thanks
you.
So much. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Shall I leave and we'll catch up a bit later then, Lorna?
Yeah, sure.
Let's do that.
No problem.
Yeah.
Look after yourself.
Okay.
Bye-bye.